Thank you, Minister, and good morning. Good morning to all of you. I would first like to thank the Premier for his very kind invitation to join you all for this conversation today. I must say, since we work at the global level and not in a domestic level, it's very unusual for me to have the privilege of peeking underneath the domestic kimono. And so to allow me to do that with you today, I actually consider an honor and a privilege. Thank you very much. And Lord Mayor, thank you very much for having me in this beautiful city. I have to tell you, I come from a whole country that has a population only slightly larger than Adelaide. But we also, as a country, are aspiring to become carbon neutral. And so to be in a city that aspires to carbon neutrality is quite moving to me. So thank you very much for your hospitality and congratulations on that aspiration. We should probably exchange notes on how we're going to get there. And thank you very much to all of you coming from all the other states and territories. It's, as I say, quite wonderful to see you gathered here today. Let me just start by sharing with you a little bit what we're doing at the international level. And perhaps it might be helpful to understand what is, not all of the technicalities and not to get into the weeds of how the Paris Agreement is being negotiated, which is actually quite weedy and quite technical. But rather, I think for today's discussion, it is interesting to understand what is the spirit or the conceptual structure of the agreement that we will be adopting in Paris. And I would share with you a couple of characteristics that all countries have actually already agreed to. They haven't agreed to many of the details, but the spirit of what the agreement is actually already an emerging consensus. So first, let me say that they have agreed that this is not going to be a one-off effort. This is going to be a long-term framework, more than anything, a long-term framework of cooperation. How do nations cooperate with each other to ensure that we stay under the 2-degree long-term maximum limit? And it is very much being seen as, if you will, the GPS or the course that is being charted toward deep carbonization over time. Not that that is going to be achieved overnight, but certainly deep decarbonization of the global economy over time. Interestingly enough, based on progressive steps at national level, and that national level fed, of course, by city and state level efforts, but very much understood that these are progressive steps. So that the numbers that are going to be putting in, and I'll talk to them about a little bit later, the numbers that are going to be putting in this year are seen as a first set of efforts, but certainly not the last. In addition, this framework that is being negotiated and that will be adopted is seen as being facilitative and enabling, not punitive, but rather inviting cooperation in order to be able to maximize everybody's efforts. It will certainly be supportive of developing countries, because it is the developing countries that are being asked to do the greatest effort, which is to continue their growth and development, but with a very different carbon footprint than that has been followed by all industrialized countries. So it will definitely be supportive of developing countries, and above all, it will be protective of growth and development, nationally and globally. So frankly, I would say, what's there not to like about that? That sounds to me like an extraordinarily wonderful set of principles and values. I would say it's probably hunky-dory, or to come to South Australia, perhaps even heaps good. So where are we with the INDCs? And I beg for forgiveness, but I promise you that is the only acronym I'm going to use today. The INDCs are the intended nationally determined contributions. That is, the contributions that every country, not just industrialized countries, but every country is going to be putting in to say, okay, in this progressive pathway toward decarbonization, this is the piece that I can do now because I have both economic, technological, financial, and political visibility over that piece that I can do now. We have received 37 from 37 different countries. We have received already 37 INDCs. Quick overview, certainly all the countries in the European Union doing at least 40% by 2030. The United States doubling what it had previous put in, and they have chosen 2025 as their target dates. They're saying they're going to be reducing anywhere between 26 to 28, but doing their best efforts at getting 28. And they're actually relatively confident that they will be able to get to the 28% cut. Russia going to 70 to 75% over their 1990 levels. Mexico, a very interesting country because it is both OECD and developing countries, so, you know, a mixture there of economies, but very impressive offer from Mexico to shave off 25% of its greenhouse gases, Mexico being a fossil fuel consumer and exporter. 25% off of its business as usual unconditionally, and then further than that if certain conditions are met. We have not had the official INDC yet from China, but we do know that China will be coming in over the next few months with also a very impressive effort there to peak coal already in 2020, peaking coal. I mean, honestly, if anybody had asked me just 2 or 3 years ago, are we soon going to see the peaking of coal in China, I would have said, I don't think so. But China will be peaking coal in 2020 and will be peaking its entire family of greenhouse gases by 2030. So you can see movement forward on the part of both industrialized countries and developing countries, everybody truly making their best effort. I hear that Australia will be putting its numbers in July, and we certainly look forward to that. What we currently have is, just for you to get a sense, is 34% of countries worldwide and 19% of global CO2 emissions are currently already under what you could call carbon management plans, or the other way to look at it is, frankly, national development plans, because they are constituting the kind of projects and measures that are going to actually attract quite a bit of investment, either on the part of domestic capital or on the part of international capital. So a very, very different view, a very positive tone. I cannot emphasize enough the level of enthusiasm, the level of commitment, the level of optimism that there is around the world about climate change no longer being seen as this huge burden, but rather increasingly so as the major opportunity that we have. In fact, I've heard it now quite a few times called the mega development project of this century, because of the job creation, because of the stability that will come. So while climate is still recognized as being one of the major threats to economic stability, it is also increasingly understood on the other side of the coin as the major opportunity that we have in the 21st century. To move now to cities, states, regions, provinces, the Secretariat, the Climate Change Secretariat that I head, has opened up a portal called the Nazca Portal. You might want to check it out. It's spelled Nazca after the beautiful Nazca lines in Peru, because it was launched in Lima, Peru last year, but we are loading there every few weeks more and more data that is coming in from cities, from states, provinces, territories. So everything that is not federal governments, we're loading in there the emission reduction targets, both midterm and long-term, that are being submitted already by cities. We have 400 cities from around the world and 71 states, provinces, and territories. And frankly, to be very honest with you, we just don't have the bandwidth in the Secretariat to be up to date with that, because the information is coming so quickly that we're actually having to figure out, okay, where can we get more help to load the information? So again, another proof point of enthusiasm and optimism. Why? Because in particular, subnational governments that are even closer to citizens than the federal government, they are really recognizing the huge positive health impacts of acting on climate. They're understanding the energy security benefits. They're understanding and already feeling the job creation benefits. They are already receiving the investments. It really is quite a sea change, let me say, from where we were 5, 6, and certainly 10 years ago. So a very, very different global mood. I would say even just 6 years ago, we had a very negative global mood on climate, and we have absolutely turned that around. We are now celebrating a very positive global mood on climate, which will be evidenced in Paris at the end of this year. But stepping away now from the formal process, let me just step away to put it into, because very often I think of the UNFCCC process as sort of a weird world of negotiations. But let me go now to the real world. And this agreement and all of the work of cities and territories and states is in the context of a changing reality. Let me point to just 3 different ways in which the reality that we knew just a few decades ago is remarkably different today. First, it used to be, and we all grew up, well, those who are younger perhaps not, but certainly all of us over 50, grew up thinking that growth in GDP was necessarily linked to growth in GHG. Those two curves, if you look at the history that we've had over the last 150 years, certainly since the Industrial Revolution, you see that those two curves have gone up side by side, and that used to be a reality. Well, my friends, that is no longer the case. That is no longer the case. Couple of data points there. The OECD countries over the past 5 years have grown at an average of 7% in their GDP and have decreased their GHG emissions by 4%. So the OECD countries as a whole have already decoupled. If you ask me, what is the purpose of the Climate Convention in one sentence? It's to decouple growth from GHG, because we have to continue to prosper, we have to continue economic growth, but we have to de-link that from greenhouse gases. That curve needs to bend down. And the OECD countries have already done that. They have already decoupled. China last year went up 7% in its GDP and down 1% in its greenhouse gases. So already China beginning to delink. Mexico has already decoupled. So not just industrialized countries, but the emerging countries already getting to the point of decoupling those two curves. Absolutely fantastic. Now, last year, and I may say, 1 year does not a trajectory make, so we have to wait and see. But last year, quite excitingly, at a world level, at a world level, it was the first time in the history of the International Energy Agency data collection, because they have collected data for 40 years. So the first time in 40 years that over the entire global economy, the economy went up and the greenhouse gases stayed flat. The entire global economy. That is an amazing piece of data, because as you can understand, certainly there are many developing countries that continue to go up in their greenhouse gases, and the fact that as a whole, on average, we seem to have reached at least the first year of decoupling, and hopefully that will become a trend, is actually something to be taken note of. So a very changed reality. My second point about changing realities, it used to be that renewable energy was not competitive with fossil fuels. Well, my dear friends, that is also no longer the case. And in fact, both in generation and in storage, we are outstripping projections just at a remarkable pace, absolutely remarkable pace, and as well as in installation and job creation. So no matter which way you look at it, whether it's generation around the world, whether it's storage, very exciting news this weekend from Tesla. We no longer just have firewalls, now we have power walls, quite an exciting concept from Tesla, and that is frankly going to revolutionize what renewable energies can do, both distributed as well as on the grid. Last year we had the highest investment in renewable energies, 270 billion into renewable energies, and in fact I would underscore more investment into renewable energy than into any other kind of energy last year. More investment into renewable. So again, a trend that begins to peak over the horizon. There is no doubt that the next 20 years are going to be seeing a dramatic growth in renewable energy, certainly in distributed energy, and I would say actually thanks to new storage capacity, also on the grid systems. I would say, just to begin to understand the transformation that we're already witnessing, just think of the jump that we have made over the past 20 years from landlines to cell phones. I don't have to give you data, you can just picture it. That kind of transformation from landlines to the computers that we all have in our tiny little pockets, that is the kind of dramatic technological shift that we're going to be having thanks to the onset of renewable energy. So a second very changed reality. And my third changed reality is that it used to be that there was both a constant and predictable demand growth for fossil fuels. And that myth has also been punctured. And that is perhaps even of more consequence than the first two changing realities. The OECD has already flattened out its demand for fossil fuels and is on a decline. The US is increasingly self-sufficient, and we know that previously we had seen that the shift in demand was coming from the emerging countries. Well, I have news from you. Even the emerging countries are beginning to decrease their demand for fossil fuels because they understand that the economic growth is actually dependent on their stability. So I've already given you the data point, China capping its coal and greenhouse gases. Let me just explain the logic here for us developing countries, where I count myself a member of the developing countries. Here is the reality that is becoming more and more part of decision making. With climate change affecting the physical infrastructure of every single country, but in particular and with most pain and most economic impact, developing countries, they understand that their economic growth depends on stabilizing that threat. That if we do not arrest climate change, if we do not arrest the growth in greenhouse gases, their growth is going to be stunted by physics, just because of the physical impact that they all already have felt and that we know is going to continue. They have already figured that out. They will either be stunting that growth by physics, or their other option is actually to, and because they stunt their growth, the appending logic of that is they would have to decrease their demand for fossil fuel, because the demand for fossil fuel has to go hand in hand with their growth. So the moment that their growth gets stunted, their demand for fossil fuel decreases. Because that is not a scenario that they would wish to go into, in particular developing countries that have such a huge population coming down the pike over the next 20 to 30 to 50 years, they are gravitating more and more toward the policy side of the equation. So they're facing basically two options here. It's either stunted by physics or mitigated by policy. And that is why countries like China, like Mexico, are already taking very, very courageous and very aggressive steps at very forward-looking policy to contribute. They understand that they cannot solely control this, just like Australia cannot solely control climate change, but they understand that they need to contribute to the global effort because it's in their own interest. So frankly, you know, what China and Mexico are doing and everybody else behind them is not because they want to save the planet. It's because they understand that that is what protects their economic growth and their development into the near and long-term future. They understand that. Now, that does not mean, of course, you know, I'm not little Alice in Wonderland here. That does not mean that we're going to eliminate fossil fuels overnight. No, that is not going to be the case. But it does point to new realities and to new market conditions that Australia should be aware of. And it points to the wisdom of a balanced approach, a progressive engagement that allows for an orderly transition of capital, of skilled labor, certainly of policies, a very orderly transition into the 21st century, with progressive steps whose purpose must be to protect the economy of Australia in the middle and the long term. So, from an outsider's perspective, and I sit completely outside of your domestic kimono, but from the outside, it does seem to us that Australia is, on the one hand, the driest continent on the planet, hence incredibly vulnerable to even more droughts, fires, etc., but it is also the sunniest and the windiest continent on the planet, hence huge opportunities here, right? So it would seem to us that there are at least 4 issues that could be pursued at the level of Australia. Certainly decarbonizing electricity would seem to us, perhaps from a very naive point of view, to make a lot of sense, in particular because of the very expensive transportation and distribution costs here, vast resources here. You can put those generation plants much closer to use. You have a zero-cost fuel. You can take advantage of the natural asset turnover that you're going to have anyway. And I've been informed, but correct me please if I'm wrong, that almost all the electric generation assets are going to be retired by 2050 anyway. So can you take advantage of that process and perhaps accelerate them a little bit because they have run their life quite soon. So a huge opportunity in decarbonizing electricity at no increased cost in Australia. Energy efficiency, you've done a fantastic job. Can you do more? I would say probably yes, but you know more about that than I. Same thing goes for carbon farming, for forestry, all of these issues on which you have already taken some steps, but there still remains some possibilities to move farther. And now let me just say, the very difficult thing, but that I do have to say. There is frankly no space in the future energy mix for any new coal, and certainly not for any coal that is unmitigated. There is just no space. Science has dictated. There is no space for unmitigated coal, and there's no space for any new coal. Science has dictated 75% of the fossil fuel reserves must stay underground if we are to stay under 2 degrees. So what that means is, if you want to translate it into the opportunity, because that is me, Miss Optimism, always looking for the positive in everything, that means a huge opportunity in Australia for CCS, and it means a very, very interesting opportunity for economic diversification with all of the new technologies that can be available to you because of your vast resources. Let me turn now to states and territories and pick up what the Premier mentioned this morning. Absolutely, I think of states and territories and even cities as the planetary incubators. There is an amazing amount of innovation that is currently underway, certainly here in Australia, but way beyond Australia, on the part of cities, territories, states, provinces, innovating and really understanding from the point of view of the economy. Please, again, no state, no territory, no city can possibly engage on climate change to save the planet. It just doesn't make sense. I wish that were true, but I'm not naive enough to think that that is actually going to be true. You do it because you understand that it is good for your economy, because in the case of cities, it makes for much more livable cities, because in the case of larger regions, because of all of the economic opportunities. And you can see that this wave is certainly growing. The Premier mentioned the Compact of States and Regions, those that are already members, that covers already 300 million people around the world, 11% of global GDP already covered by that compact, and it is the first and currently the only global account of greenhouse gas management on the part of subnationals, and the first assessment of how everybody is doing at that level will be made public at COP21. So I would also underline the invitation that you heard from the Premier for those of you who are interested in joining that space, because it's a very interesting space of exchange of best practices, what in particular you want to learn from each other, what doesn't work. That is probably the most important lesson that any of us can learn, and there is a lot to be learned there, both of what doesn't work and what is working for other subnationals. Finally, let me leave you with the most important message this morning. In Australia, but also in every other country, states and territories have a fundamental, yes, you have a technical and an economic imperative here, and a huge advantage. But more than anything, from where I sit, the opportunity and frankly, the responsibility of states and territories is to build a bridge to the federal government. To build a bridge to work in coordination with the federal government to attain the best vertical integration that is possible. That means to actually work with each other across states and territories, to understand each other's different perspectives, because each of you is completely unique. Each of you has natural resource base that are completely unique. Each of you has opportunities that are unique, but to understand that diversity and then be able to bring it together to maximize the opportunities, both as states and territories, but then fundamentally as a nation. Fundamentally as a nation. That collaboration, no matter who is sitting in the lodge, is absolutely fundamental for your benefit, for Australia's benefit, and frankly, for the planet's benefit. It does nobody any good to here or in any other country to insert climate change into a divisive conversation, into partisan politics. We have to move beyond that. We have to move beyond partisan politics. This is not about a discussion for elections. And I know that many elections have been won and lost in Australia, and I respect that. But the way forward, my friends, is to move this out of partisan politics. We need to come to the point where this is not a partisan issue, where this is a human issue, where we all understand that it is our responsibility to protect the resources that we have, to use the resources that we can use with the new technologies, and above all, it is our common responsibility, no matter what our party, and I come from a political party, and therefore I speak, no matter what our political party, it is our common responsibility to ensure the stability and the growth of our economies, both at the national level and certainly at the state and territorial level, but also at the global level. And the well-being, the stability, the prosperity of future generations is not something that we should be discussing. That is something that we should all rally around. And I think if you ask our children and our grandchildren, they would be able to tell you this is not about partisan politics. This is about the most important and sacred thing that we have, our legacy to our future generations. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Ian. Let me just quickly say, just like for you, it is important to hear what the international community is doing at the intergovernmental level. For me, it has been equally important to listen to what I'm sure is only the tip of the iceberg of what territories and states are doing here. I'm actually very impressed with the amount of both the depth and the breadth of policies and measures and targets that are being pursued here by states and territories. And I've heard two terms that both refer to the same thing: closer alignment and building national consensus. And it just seems to me that that goes across both sides of the metrics. On the one hand, closer alignment and better consensus among states and territories, and many of you have spoken to that about the advantage of that. But then also, of course, with the Commonwealth government to have closer alignment and building national consensus. Honestly, it seems like a really fantastic, very positive opportunity for the federal government to take advantage of everything that is already underway and be able to present at the international level the full breadth and depth of what Australia is doing, and thereby be able to join the community of nations with a responsible and serious address to climate change. Thank you.